You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Now, more of our interview with former University of Minnesota President Bob Bruininks. As we record this interview in mid-June, there is a standoff at the legislature between the Republican majority in the legislature and Governor Mark Dayton. The legislature has approved about $71 million in cuts for the university. The governor has vetoed that bill. How is this affecting future plans for the university? You just presented your budget to the regents this past week. Tell us about that budget and what impact it will have on the university.
Well, I am really upset about this budget, and you've heard me say so in a number of venues. That is this budget recommendation, because the cuts are far too deep. If you just assume the university should be cut in its proportion, you know, a proportional cut in relationship to the state $5 billion deficit, we'd be cut at about a third of what we're being cut in this proposal that the governor vetoed. So the cuts are far too deep. And there are so many strings attached to the university's budget. There are restrictions on the research we can do. There are restrictions on tuition and fees. I mean, this is the most overregulated bill I've seen in 42 years of service at the University of Minnesota. So what I would say are the following. Reduce the cut on the University of Minnesota in Minsky. These cuts are far too deep, especially on the heels of a $193 million cut in the last 2 years here at the University of Minnesota. And secondly, if you're going to ask us to do difficult things, let us set our priorities. That's what you send the Board of Regents to do. And let us set those priorities and hold us accountable for the results. So my plea to the leaders in St. Paul is that they figure out a way to compromise. You need to have some revenue to help the state through this very difficult patch. And I think we also have to, unfortunately, take it on the chin. And so we're prepared to do our part to really help the state solve this problem. But I think these cuts are way disproportionate, particularly in relationship to the severe cuts that were visited on higher education in the last 2 years. But there's no reason why we can't expect. The citizens of the state have a right to expect that our leaders can solve our problems, and so I'm hopeful they'll get busy, roll up their sleeves, compromise the differences that are on the table, and get us a budget that we can manage July 1. I don't have any choice as the president of the university. I had to put on the table and ask the board to approve a budget that reflected these deep cuts that came out of the House and Senate Conference Committee. We had to put the worst case scenario on the table, but we've said that if the conditions get better, and they should, I believe they have an obligation to make them better, students would benefit, the academic program services would be restored, and we'd have modest funding, some modest funding for the new incoming president to help set the priorities of the university's future.
We hear the argument from some legislators and others that institutions and organizations are being forced across the board to make very painful cuts in some cases. The U's 2010 fiscal budget was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3 billion. Some would say any institution with a budget that size would certainly have some operating inefficiencies. What do you say to those who suggest that the U is bloated and needs to scale back?
Well, this reminds me of that old expression, no good deed goes unpunished. So in the 9 years that I've served as president, we've increased the university's budget about $1 billion outside of state support. Now, if we were 3M, they would say, way to go. You've increased your profit margin, your sales are up. This is something to really celebrate. You're a much more productive place. But somehow when it comes to the University of Minnesota and it comes to other public agencies, if those agencies really produce, that's somehow a problem. Is it a problem that the university's budget is up $1 billion in the last 8 to 10 years? I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a cause to celebrate. It's bringing more money into Minnesota. It's providing more jobs for Minnesotans. It's creating economic activity and improving Minnesota's quality of life. So that would be the first thing I would say. I think the arguments are misplaced. The second thing I would say is that I agree with critics of the University of Minnesota who believe we can get better. That's what the strategic plan and repositioning process was all about. It was about trying to improve the university's quality, its productivity, its efficiency, and its impact on society. And so I don't have a problem with being challenged to get better, to be more productive, to use resources more effectively. But I think you have to, at the same time, judge the University of Minnesota by what it produces, what value it produces in society, and particularly in the state of Minnesota. For every dollar the state invests in us, we produce a $13 plus rate of return. That is, for every dollar we get from the state, we produce over $13 in economic activity over and above the state's investment. If you take the direct dollars we spend and the dollars that are spent again in the state's economy, we're the second highest employer in the state of Minnesota. The research alone of the University of Minnesota creates 17,000 jobs in our private economy. That's something to feel really good about, and that's something to worry about, because if you put that at risk, if you drive the rainmakers out, the rain will not come, and Minnesota will be the worse off in the global economy. So I think we can get better, and we are. The story of the last several years is one of increasing productivity and efficiency at the University of Minnesota. It's a really good story. I'd put it up against any private sector operation in the state of Minnesota. But that's not an argument for disinvesting in the University of Minnesota. That's not an argument for disinvesting in education. That's a weak argument. What we should be looking at is, do we get a good return on our investment? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. This is the best investment, along with early childhood education, that the state of Minnesota can make if it plans to assure its long-term future. So I just think this argument's too narrow. It's not futuristic enough. It's too sort of tactical to really deal with the state's position in the global economy. And if we stay with this level of argument and reasoning, I think we'll really be compromising the long-term future of this great university in our state.
Stay tuned for more of our interview with former University of Minnesota President Bob Bruininks.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.